areas that could use some support. Standardized testing makes that possible in a way that homegrown or in-house assessments can't do quite the same. Why use ERB assessments specifically? And I just realized I haven't even said the name of the test. It's the CTP, so I'm just throwing around random letters at this point. It's the Comprehensive Testing Program. That's the name of the assessment that's going to be implemented here. It's probably kind of important, and you know that. But why use ERB's assessments specifically? Well, so a state-level assessment, like what I believe would be the EOGs in North Carolina, they allow for an assessment of what is kind of regarded as basic skills. Has its place. Not here to badmouth state assessments. But that's kind of the role that they play. Classroom assessments offer a short-term assessment. Right? What did we do this last week or these last 2 weeks in class? ERB's assessment, the Comprehensive Testing Program specifically, beat both of those in some important senses. That it's a rigorous assessment. It does more than assess basic skills. And it's a long-term assessment. It's only administered one time every year. So there's 365 days between these administrations. So by having that level of magnification, you get to do things that in-class assessments, as great as they are, can't do. And because of the nature of its construction, you get to do things that state assessments simply can't do. So that's the real value that CTP as an assessment brings to a school like Grace Christian. And as I already mentioned, I was working with the faculty and administration from 2 to 5:30 today, training them on all of the features of this assessment. And I'm going to be returning in October to sort of complete that training for the time being after the assessment has been administered and the data has been collected, to work with teachers and staff on what is all of this saying in the here and now, and what's the step forward? How do we take this forward? So I look forward to building this relationship with Grace Christian, and if I may, it sounds as though they're eager for that as well, given their experiences in the past. Then this having me so close by in Richmond, Virginia, I think is going to be a great thing. So those are the reasons for using ERB's assessments as a school. Agreed. So it's all good. What is the Comprehensive Testing Program specifically? What does it do? What does it test? What is it after? What is it looking for in students? It really comes down to two kinds of domains. There's the verbal domain and the mathematics domain. And within each of those, there's two sort of smaller types of assessments that are at play. One is a reasoning test and one is an achievement test. What is reasoning? Reasoning is, what is the student bringing to the table in terms of their conceptual and abstract thinking skills? So you could think of it as learned ability. There was a question from the staff earlier: is this an IQ test? Is it an intelligence test? I won't go that far. It does not do those sorts of things. It's not constructed in the way that an IQ test is, but it does give you a very solid understanding of the student's conceptual and abstract thinking skills, with things like analogies and sort of pattern recognition at various levels of complexity. These sorts of things are what are working. And the teachers here will have access to a host of resources that go into great detail to help them understand all of the standards and all of the strands within the assessment that are at play. So in advance of the assessment, they have an understanding of what's coming, and then when all of that data comes back to them about their students, about their classes, they'll be able to make very good use of that data to say, here are very specific areas where students are strong. Here's specific areas where students need additional support. So again, it's breaking down into two major kinds of things that are going on: reasoning and achievement. So again, how that plays out in mathematics would be quantitative reasoning. How do you think conceptually with regards to numbers and numerical concepts? And how does that play out in the kinds of curriculum you might have encountered? How are you with measurement? How are you with probability? How are you with geometry? How are you with numbers and number sense? These sorts of things, the more curricular-based things that you might come across. That's really what's being assessed. If you'd like, I could go into additional detail about the particular subtests. Is that of interest to folks? Yes. All right. This one's for you. So in the verbal domain, there'll be things like verbal reasoning, as I mentioned, vocabulary, reading comprehension, writing mechanics, writing concepts and skills. Those kind of runs the gamut of the verbal side of things. And then mathematics is quantitative reasoning. There's a very large mathematics section, broken up into 2 days, so don't worry. But it's something like 80 or so questions across those 2 days. And then at level 7, 8, or 9, there's available a Algebra 1 subtest as well. So depending upon where Algebra 1 falls in any given school's curriculum, they can place it accordingly. Yes, sir. No, there's not a open-ended written portion of the assessment. It is all multiple choice. It's an excellent question. Thank you for that. Yeah, there's not any instance where they'll be producing a paragraph or an essay or anything of that sort. That's a different assessment. I'll talk to the head of school about that using it next year. So that's kind of how it breaks down in terms of what is being assessed. And just in a little sort of more nuts and bolts kind of administration thing I thought might be worthwhile for you all to know. For levels 1 and 2, the test is untimed. There's no time limit for the students on what it takes to complete the assessment. Levels 3 through 10 is a timed test. Little asterisk there is that there's one subtest in level 3 that is untimed. So I didn't want to have to get too complex in my representation. So there's levels 1 and 2, completely untimed. Levels 3 through 10 is a timed test. And the timing varies. It's anywhere between 25 and 45 minutes for a subtest. And we were discussing sort of scheduling and how best to do that, how best to implement that. And I think it was something that we decided, or you all decided. I didn't decide anything. I just listened. Something like 2 subtests per day was just deemed a humane way to treat your children. Yes. Great question. That was where I was heading next. So thank you for the segue. I'll pay you after the show. So level does not correspond to the grade as the school is using the test in the fall. So the level is one number below the grade. Didn't want to crowd the slide with too much information. So level 1 would be for 2nd graders. Level 2 would be for 3rd graders. Fill in the rest. That's how it generally breaks down in terms of the administration. And if there's interest about kind of more administrative stuff, I'm happy to oblige. So things like there's a break time built in between subtests. So, they'll have a chance to get up and move around, and drink a cup of water, use the bathroom, that sort of thing. It's not like a complete barrage of standardized testing. So there's it's pretty spread out, pretty easy going, I should say. Yes.
Going back to how you come up with math. In 6th grade, we've got 2 different types of math. 6th grade math and pre-algebra.
Okay.
All of those students we tested then on their math. Is it just general math? And if you're in regular math, you'll have some pre-algebra questions. Or if you're pre-algebra, you get regular 6th grade questions. Is it all one math for 6th grade then?
I'm a bit reluctant to answer on behalf of the school. I can say what the test does,
Okay.
and how the school picks up, for example, the algebra side of things. I'll allow them to answer. But so math itself does have sort of pre-algebraic concepts as sort of one of the smaller strands that's woven through. It's not a dominant strand or anything like that, but it is built in there. For levels 7, 8, and 9, there's a full-blown dedicated Algebra 1. You've already had Algebra 1 subtest, and how schools administer that, or whether they administer that, because I have some of my schools that choose not to do that. That's at the discretion of the school. So that's where my understanding of what Grace Christian ends, what they're planning on doing.
Sorry, it's something that made me worry about that. If you said the levels are basically 1 grade lower than where they currently are, then you're really going to be testing on 5th grade math, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah, and so I guess another point about that is that as a 6th grader seeing a level 5, you're sort of casting the widest net over everything that they've experienced, right? It's going to cover hopefully the entirety of their memory of their 5th grade year. And that'll be all captured in that level 5 testing data for the 6th grader. Yeah. Oh. Any other questions on that, in that vein? Good. Oh, yes, ma'am. Mhm. So, for example, CTP as an assessment can be administered in the fall or the spring. It's up to the schools to choose. We're, for example, at Grace Christian to choose to administer it in the spring. The seventh graders, for example, receive level 7. So it still would be sort of the year that was. Other standardized testing companies, I've never tried to pretend to be an expert about what they do, but I can visit their websites. Other standardized testing companies, I think, have like a spring-only administration. So if it's for a 7th grader, it's going to be about some kind of generally agreed upon sense of what a 7th grader ought to know by the end of the year. That's my understanding of the way a spring test is kind of structured. Did I answer your question? Thanks. But that does bring up a really, I think, a really important next point. We're going to get there. So let's put a pin in that because that brings up a really important point about why cover the sorts of things that are being covered, which I feel like is maybe in the background of what you're asking. That's a really important question. What qualifies as 7th grade? Who decided that? And so we'll get to that. So that's a really important thing. But the last little bit about why using standardized assessments, it forms or it completes this cycle of if you went to teachers college or if you ever taught in a classroom, this kind of a model is a fairly common model of the way that the rhythm of the classroom. You teach, you assess, you report based on what the reports tell you. You teach differently, and you assess, and you see what the reports did, and so on. It's this constant iterative process. Any classroom teacher is doing this within 45 minutes. They might be doing it. They might be doing it over the course of a week. With a standardized assessment, now you've blown that out to a year and have that consistency at the year-long level. So the CTP then sits here at the top of the cycle, and with the reporting as it exists, for those students at Grace Christian that are going to be taking the test online, which is levels 4 and up, or Grace 5 and up, that online reporting data comes back nearly instantaneously. The paper stuff obviously has to get mailed somewhere and run through a machine, but all of that online stuff is going to be ready more or less right away. So in terms of putting it into action and accelerating this process of assessing, reporting, and teaching, CTP, I think, stands as a vast improvement, if I may say, over what has gone before in terms of being able to put data to work for your children almost immediately across the board.
Philippe, can I say something right there too?
Absolutely.
I think you guys get this, but just the whole emphasis of what we're doing is to improve instruction. The former way of doing the testing, really it was done in the spring and used predominantly for placing kids for the upcoming year, kind of assessing where we were at the end of the year. But by the time we got test scores back, there wasn't a whole lot to do with that year. You can't respond to it, and then the kids are gone for the summer. So the whole point of moving it into the fall, and especially early on in the fall, is to get that feedback, be able to deal with it and work with those kids while they're still in your classroom and have the rest of the year to work off of that. So that's one of the things that I hope you really get out of this conversation. That's our goal, and that's the intent of why we're doing this in this way.
That can't be stressed enough, right?
That's the big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal, and a bigger deal than the fall administration, although that is a big deal, is this sort of renewed relationship to the test and the testing data as well that's taking place. And I think that's very important. So, thank you. And I thought I had a slide in there that was going to address your point about the topic I mentioned a moment ago about why test when anything is test. So I want to just, without having any visual reference, talk about sort of the origins of the test, just sort of what it's built on. So ERB as an organization has a long-standing partnership with an organization called ETS. Raise your hand if you've heard of the GREs. Raise your hand, keep your hand up if you've taken the GREs. Oh, good for you. Keep your hand up if you passed the GREs. All So GRE is another assessment that has items developed by ETS, the TOEFL. Anybody heard of the TOEFL exam? Yeah. Same organization, sort of the mastermind item writers behind that. So ERB has a long-standing relationship with ETS as our item writers, and we're very proud of that. And we feel that sort of pedigree means that we have a high-quality assessment as well. And so in that partnership, we were able to work with them to develop items of a particular rigor and caliber. That's really a lot of the reputation, and perhaps one of the main reasons that Grace Christian was drawn to our assessment is it has a very great reputation as being a rigorous for private and independent students. All students to a very, very high standard. So on the note of standards, it's built upon the National Council of Teachers of English Standards, National Council of Teachers of Mathematics Standards, the International Literacy Association Standards. Those may or may not be organizations that you're familiar with, but those are sort of the big players. Like if there was a big three sort of automotive equivalent of education, like those would be the big three in terms of stating what students ought to know by the time they're done 5th grade or 6th grade or what have you. These are the standards. They put these out, they maintain them, they update them all the time. So that cooperation with ETS and then the building these items on the foundation of these long-standing, respected standards organizations means we have the type of assessment that we do, used by the schools that are using it, holding themselves to a very, very high standard. Felt like that was a really important thing to emphasize. So, and it was born out of a comment from over here about, how do you know what happens at the end of 7th grade? Well, these standard-setting organizations, it's their job to have like a very thoroughgoing, well-understood sense of what does a 7th grader or a 5th grader or whomever grader need to know by the time they're done. So that's what's sort of undergirding all of this is these standard-setting organizations. You might carry on. So when the time comes, you all will receive a report that looks a little something like this. This is why if you were in the back, it would have been great if you came forward, but you didn't, so you missed out. This is one of a parent-facing report that perhaps very likely what you'll see post September 10th testing and all of that. You'll have your child's name and all of this sort of name, rank, and serial number up here. You'll see the subtests that your student was assessed on. This is a 5th grader, so we're seeing verbal reasoning, vocabulary, reading comp, writing mechanics, writing concepts, quantitative reasoning, and math 1 and 2. 1 and 2 again because it's that big honking test that's split over 2 days. Then you're going to see corresponding scaled scores. Don't worry, I'm going to define all of these in just a moment. And then you'll see national norm group ranking information, and then that same ranking information represented graphically on the bottom. So that's kind of the rundown of what you'll see. Now I want to go in and actually define what all of those idiosyncratic terms I just threw around so casually actually mean. So, with the help of this beautiful PowerPoint-inspired hierarchy. So, everything that is on that report is represented here, except for this piece of information here. It's the source of all data that standardized testing company can develop. It's called the raw score. Raw score, put very, very simply, how many questions did you answer correctly? If you think wistfully back to your days as a child in school, you had a quiz and there were 10 questions and you got 7 right, so that's a 70%. Like that's kind of how we understand grades broadly conceived. So raw scores are just that. How many questions did I answer correctly on this thing? And as a classroom teacher, myself included, we do a lot of that sort of stuff. Here's your vocab quiz. You get one every week for the entire year. Pretend I was a really bad teacher. That's what I did every single week was a vocab quiz. So on the first one, you got 1 out of 10 questions correct. And on the second one, you got 2. And then as the year got on, you maybe got 5 correct, and then 7 correct, and then 9. By the end of the year, you were getting all of your vocabulary questions correct on the vocabulary quizzes. What do we call that kind of movement from 1 out of 10 correct to 10 out of 10 correct? Oh, we gotta be louder than that.
Upward.
Yes. upward movement, growth, progress, learning, something along those lines, right? So if you do enough of those kinds of assessments, you can triangulate a student's progress over time, and it's all well and good. Classroom teachers do this sort of all thing all the time, and it works. It's really, really effective. A standardized testing company has professional item writers and psychometricians. That's not an insult. That's actually a degree you can get, psychometrician. So it's their job to understand questions and how they function and their complexity level and how performance on certain kinds of questions sort of can be understood and mathematically churned around to say more than just you got 1 out of 10 correct. So with that understanding, you can run the total number of questions a student answers correctly and fold it in with the complexity level of the question. You can get a really robust piece of information out of that, and that's called the scaled score. That's that 3-digit score that was on the previous report, right? Mike over here has a 347 in verbal reasoning. Don't worry, he didn't see 400 verbal reasoning questions and answered 347 of them correctly. This is a conversion of a lot of information into 1 bit. So that's what the scaled score is. It contains a lot of information, and it's not giving away any secrets here. It's where you as a parent would look over time to see, is there growth in my child's scores from 1 year to the next? So if you have a little file folder like my mom did when I was in school, that when I moved out she gave me, you will hold on to these things, and you will have, in addition to class photos, these score reports, and you can see from 1 year to the next the movement of these scaled scores. And the watchword is up, as it was so elegantly shouted from the middle section over here. So the scaled score, it holds that information within it. Now the fun thing, if you like statistics, it's fun. The fun thing that you can do with this kind of data is you can play with it, manipulate it, move it around, and then do other things with it. So what you can do then with a whole bunch of scaled scores, like say, I don't know, 75,000 bits of information, is you can then figure out, well, how did I do compared to the other 74,999 people in that data set? And so that's exactly what you can do with data. So you just array it in order, and you can say, oh, your score was better than 80% of the group, and your score was better than 85% of the group, and my score was better than 30% of the group. So I now have a relative understanding of your performance, my performance, anybody's performance participated in this assessment. And that's what a percentile rank is. How did I do compared to other humans who actually did this thing? So broad meaning how many data points are in the. Yeah, so let me jump a little bit ahead. And so the norming information that will be worked with on the reports is a national norm. So it's a nationally representative sampling of students from across the country. Nationally representative across all factors, right? So that means geographically representative. It means socioeconomically representative. It means racially representative. It means representative in terms of public and private schools, right? So I think these are the numbers right now, like 90% of students in the country go to public schools. Well, so our national norm group must represent that distribution. If it has any other kind of composition, then we can't call it nationally representative. It would just be false. It would be, we'd be lying, right? So the national norm group is collected through a rigorous sampling protocol of students from across the United States. And it's logistically very challenging to do that because, for example, if we needed, for some demographic reason, a small public school in rural Montana, we have to go to rural Montana and administer tests. But the good thing about a rigorous sampling protocol is that you don't need to test every single student in the country. You just need to test them in the right proportions and the right numbers in order to get a statistically meaningful number. So in terms of at each level in each subtest for the national norm, it might be anywhere between 1,500 and 3,500 students that are in that national norm. That might sound so teensy, but it is rock solid from a statistical psychometric point of view. We as an organization take that the sanctity, so to speak, of the national norm very seriously. And so it's periodically checked in on by our test developers and our pediatricians. Is it still valid? Is it still representative? Is there some large trend that is signaling a shift in the performance of students across the country that warrants us revisiting that and changing it? Now, this won't mean a great deal for this school as they're beginning the test now with CTP, but the previous iteration, CTP4, has been around for a little while, and CTP5 is starting this fall. And we're going to be updating the national norms with new sampling, new data, and sort of folding all that in together to get an even more contemporary national norm. I think I answered your question in there somewhere. If I talk long enough, I'm just going to hit it eventually, right? Other questions about national norming or anything like that? Sir? Yeah, so the national norm that exists currently was developed in 2002, so it's due for an update to be sure. I don't know what standard operating procedure for other assessment companies is in terms of updating the national norm. So, yeah. Another word on the national norm is, again, it's my understanding that the previous assessment you all are familiar with also had a national norm. And I can't speak necessarily to the protocol or the sampling methods that were used to develop that. So it's sort of unknown, it's unclear what's going to happen in terms of relative scoring of a student who took the previous assessment and is not going to be taking CTP. It's sort of square one in a lot of really exciting ways as a school. So this first round of assessment is going to be just one data point. And anybody who knows anything about data points is you can draw a lot of lines through one point on the graph. You need multiple points of data to say something is happening here. So again, when I come back in the year 2020 and we have 3 years of data, then we can really start talking about trend data. 1 year of data is just going to be, here's where we are, what do we do with this? Did I capture that from earlier? I wanted to make sure I... So all of that being said, so now that we've, back up actually. Percentile rank is that ranking stuff. And then STAY9 is another outgrowth of the data. STAY9 is a way of taking all of the percentile ranks, 1 through 99. And I've heard bad news for your parents. There's no 100th percentile. So you have no right to ever contact the school and say, why isn't my child in the 100th percentile? They cannot perform better than themselves. It's impossible at one point in time. So you take all of those 99 percentiles, 1st through 99th, and there's ways of just sort of slicing that data up to make it a little more efficient to use as a school or as a parent who's just glancing over the data perhaps. And that's what the STAY9 is all about. You take 99 percentile ranks and you chop them up into 9 standard divisions. See what they did there? And you get what's called a STAY9. And it's just a helpful way to look at student scores. So that's on the score report here. There's this column called STAY9. And so it's just expressed as a single digit number. And that can be a helpful reference point. I call it the sort of quick and dirty statistics. Like, 7 STAY9. And then if you want greater detail of the percentile rank expressed there. Schools can use that for looking at change over time. Again, since you obviously are all compiling this binary that you'll give to your children when they leave the house someday, when you're looking at reports from 1 year to the next, a quick reference point might be, Sally in verbal reasoning as a 5th grader was in the 7th STAY9, and she's in the 7th STAY9 again as a 6th grader. Cool. She's holding her position in the ranks. If she drops, so like the 4th STAY9, there's cause for questioning. How might that have happened? Sir. No, it doesn't work out that neatly, unfortunately. The 7th STAY9, I believe, contains something like it's like the 72nd to the 79th or something like that. Because the higher you go in the STAY9, the smaller the population is, because it's part of the bell curve. So there's very few of us that are in the 7th, 8th, and 9th STAY9s, or very few of us that are in the 3rd, 2nd, or 1st. Most of us hate to break it to you, are average. So those chunks in the middle are very big. The 5th stay 9 is something like 20 some percentile ranks living in there, whereas the 7th is maybe 5 or 6. Better in the sense of ranking higher than, yes. So somebody who's in the 9th stay 9, for example, my fake student up here, Mike, he's in the 9th stay 9 for quantitative reasoning. He's in the 98th percentile. His score is better than 98% of students who took the test. So better in that sense, for sure. Sir. Right. Sure. Julia, do you want to address that? Because I know that we talked about national primarily today, but did you want to address the other availabilities with the parents? Do you want?
So there are other norm groups that we can add. In fact, we'll be looking at those too, the private school norm groups, and then we don't have an ECSI norm group, but there are within other communities that we're a part of. So we'll be able to look at those in addition to the national groups and see where we're comparing with other private schools and other Christian schools.
Yeah, so to Julia's point about a variety of associations, there's even North Carolina Association of Independent Schools norm group that is available to schools, so they can see themselves through a variety of lenses, yeah, not just national, for sure. So, before we sort of wrap up the report side of things, I think I sort of touched upon briefly the. So this is I call them parent-facing reports. Schools have access to a host of reports to give them lenses into groups and a variety of other kind of factors that they'll be using that I'll be working with them to help them understand how to implement for the students themselves. In addition to all of those reports, there's also those reports reveal data at varieties of levels of magnification that help schools identify the needs of groups, the needs of individuals, down to like a heightened specificity. And with the rollout of this new generation of the CTP, that level of specificity will only increase, allowing Grace Christian to serve students at an even higher level than the reporting that I'm sharing with you. This is last generation, so there's new generations coming out. Starting September 4th, they'll have access to it. I'll be working with them to help them implement here at the school. So, don't want anybody to leave thinking like this is all that a school will ever see. For the students, there's a wealth of it, and I think everybody's pretty excited about learning about what it is and how to, and all of the other resources that we have available for helping students moving forward. A couple sort of concluding remarks, if I may, about standardized testing, reading a report. It's really important to remember that apparently the PowerPoint wants me to stop. It's a one-time event, right? So this is what happens once a year on one day in a 30 to 40-minute time frame. And schools are uniquely positioned, given their relationship and their intimate relationship with students and you all as a community, to then see these events in the context, in a larger context. And that context means, like I said, this community, but also year on year on year, that begins to develop a context of understanding the assessment data as well. I would never pretend that any one standardized assessment is the final word or the ultimate say on any student in any context. So it's one of multiple measures. This happens once a year. It's a very finely tuned instrument to be used once a year. But there's things happening every moment of every day throughout the halls of this school to understand your child as well. So it's one piece of a very complex, multifaceted image that gets created over the however 180 some instructional days that are happening here. And as I think I've emphasized a couple times, trends only become visible over time. Perhaps it's even sort of circular reasoning. Trends, of course, happen over time. So here at this inaugural year of CTP at Grace Christian School, we have we're starting sort of stage 1 of CTP and its role here, and as things move forward, we'll be working together closely to then understand what is being revealed. Again, there's insights and data and reporting here that I don't think have been at your disposal before, and so there's a lot to learn, a lot to take on. It's a big project. The last point I think I've used this phrase a couple times, so forgive me for bludgeoning it publicly again, but it's really important to think about assessment as a tool to benefit students, right? It's very easy for students themselves to feel as though, oh, this is just another thing that's being done at me and that I have to like do it. But I think when it's taken up the right way, as I believe it's happening here, students then really, it flips around. They are the beneficiaries of the assessment. The whole school is sort of reorienting itself around this assessment to see how can we use this to benefit them, to add value. There's a whole host of reasons that you chose to send your children to the school, and the work that is going to be done with this assessment for their benefit is hopefully now one of those reasons that you continue to send your child to the school. So on that note, if there's any sort of final questions, I'm happy to take those in. Yes,
Will
ma'am.
these results be available for the September 27th and 28th teacher conferences?
So the online testers will have that, and if I'm doing the math correctly in my head, starting testing September 10th, finishing testing on the 11, 12, 13th or so. The paper testers probably won't have their results ready because it does take 15 to 20 business days for that to get processed on our end. And that's just a physical limitation of time and space. But if your child is old enough to be taking the test online, then the answer is yes. And again, that would believe that was grades 5 and up are doing it online. Grades 4 and up, thank you. That's the 9th time I've made that mistake today. So again, grades 4 and up are doing it online, so it should be ready for those dates. So, depending upon the grade, so the youngest grades see just 4 subtests, and then by the time you're in levels 4 and up, there's 8 subtests, and then 7, 8, and there's when the option of algebra 1 gets introduced, there's 9 subtests. 40 minutes is just sort of the ballpark estimate. They range between 25 for some and 45 for others. So could be, yes. If algebra 1 is on the menu, then there could be 9 in that 1 week period.
Q. Go all the way
Anything you
down
want
to
to add
Q.
to the scheduling? Is that still a work in progress? I don't want to speak too far on behalf of the school, and then you have to walk back things that I've said here.
Well, I speak for the lower teacher.
Okay.
It is still a work in progress. We're gonna talk with our teachers and try to make the best improvements we can about those subtests and taking them together on those days. And kind of like you said, we're not gonna.
But the standard operating procedure for the 99% of the schools that I work with is CTP, which is upwards of 200 schools. They do no more than 2 subtests per day. And that sort of everything's over by the time lunch is around, and the remainder of the day is back to normal.
For those that are on this campus, the first 2 hours each day will be set aside for that. The rest of the campus, that is, because only 7th and 8th grade are taking this test, the rest of the campus will be functioning on a regular schedule, just modified. So,
And really quiet.
yes, absolutely.
And that will be true on the lower classes as well. Kindergarten and first grade, TK kindergarten and first grade, because they're on the first floor, they'll still be on about their schedule as usual as well. Problems for math at all?
The math teachers, I've already sent out information for them that they can only review or do like enrichment type stuff if they're in a class that has multiple grade levels.
Question, my son joined us today, so I had to contact the teacher for the test.
To do what?
My son joined today, 7th grade, so test, I think he had to contact the teacher for the test. So
No, the test is only on the
previous grade.
Yeah, no, it will automatically take with this class.
Anything else? Oh, sorry.
Maybe my question for later. It's more, I know that some of the grades, at least my son's grade, they switched to Singapore math this year. So I'm curious if the results of the test are simply the math portion of it.
The change to Singapore math, previous review of curriculum, previous test results helped to inform that decision to make a curriculum shift. So that's why we made a change already to our math curriculum during our review process this past year. So we will be able to have, as explained, those data points for the next couple of years to see the impact of Singapore math over math. But we won't be able to assess that obviously now. This one. By next year, we'll have some comparative data.
I can say that many of my schools who use CTP speak of Singapore math as, and they find it to be a welcome pairing between the two. The assessment, our assessment, and that curriculum work well together. Just that's my anecdotal observation about the relationship between those two, if I may add that to the conversation.
And they're both aligned to the same standards.
Yeah.
So with CTP being aligned with the National Council for Teaching Mathematics, the same is for math and focusing on math. So we'll be able to have a good comparison based on the standard data.
It's some of the trend to compare the same class over time, or is it to compare a class in its previous classes that belong to the same school? Different approach like that. Well, our class this year, Grace Richard, collectively did not as well as the 1 year foundation was, as well as 3 years before you. This year changes like change math. General approach.
I can speak to my experience working with schools with the data, so they'll do both. They will look at this group of fifth graders, say they have 25 students, let's say, and if they remain relatively constant over time, so that group of fifth grade, that 25 students then become sixth graders and become seventh graders, you can see what kind of a ripple, if any, a curricular change has over time. You can do the other thing that you explained, which is to say, everybody who passes through fifth grade, what happens? Is there something that always happens when students hit fifth grade? Is it, let me dial that back a little bit, because third grade is sometimes a critical year that the students go from learning to read to reading to learn. So sometimes there's this moment where their scores can shift, and so as they pass through third grade, there can be this kind of wobble or ripple that occurs. But it's simply because of the shift in how reading is being used in the classroom as being approached. Is it learning to read is one thing, reading to learn is a completely different thing altogether. It has to happen sometime. It usually happens around third grade. So schools can use both approaches, and especially with the group level data and historical data that we have that automatically compiles 5 years of data once it's available. Grace Christian will be able to do both approaches to understand what impact something like Singapore math implementation this year will have 5 years from now.
I'd like to add to that, it is really important for us to look at groups, both as a snapshot and over time. But one of the biggest benefits of this program that I really want to emphasize is that we're going to be able to really dig into the individuals' data so that we can start, so that it can impact instruction right away for our kids. That's what Believe is coming back for in October to go over with our teachers, how we use this data immediately to start informing instruction and those standards where our kids individually may have struggled a little, so that we can address any needs that we see right away. So, and to challenge those who are doing really well, right?
As I always say, if you can move the needle on one student, you move the needle on the group. Any other questions? Well, if you're holding off until everybody leaves and you just want to approach me directly, I'm happy to also speak one-on-one, hang back a little bit. So if there are no group or sort of questions for the common wheel, as they say, thank you so much again for your time, for your questions, for your thought, for your concern and attention to your children and their assessments. I look forward to working with Grace Christian in the coming years and helping them implement this assessment for the benefit of all of your students. So have a lovely evening. Take care. Be well. Drive safe. If you haven't had dinner, bon appetit.
Here we go.